These past years have been quite interesting for turn-based RPGs, because we have seen some amazing entries, like Persona 5, Baldur's Gate 3, Metaphor, and Expedition 33. But it is also true that a wave of misinformation, hate, and nonsense came with it, where some people say that turn-based RPGs are finally coming back, or that they should have never won any GOTY award because they are turn-based RPGs, hence something dated and boring. And the list of these kinds of comments can go on and on. All you need to do is open Twitter and well, you get the idea. Of course, here I don't want to be polemic. I want to check what is going on here, because through the years I've seen a lot of hatred towards turn-based RPGs. So let's try to break down some of those moments, general comments, and why these kinds of things happen. Probably one of the most interesting things to check is how some people point at turn-based RPGs as a kind of limitation, because some IPs never wanted to go down that particular road, or at least, some didn't want to release some games with turn-based systems, which is the case of Final Fantasy VII. History says they wanted an action RPG, but because of technical limitations, it was impossible to do it. But as Square and technology advanced, it was possible to see other entries take a different route, so it is easy to say that turn-based RPGs shouldn't exist. But at the end of the day, this is just an idea. It is similar to say that chess shouldn't exist because you can always throw a horse over a wall.
Doesn't make no sense, obviously.
Others try to explain that turn-based RPGs are unrealistic, because it doesn't make sense that we have to wait for the enemy to react and attack with some of the best moves, or how some strategic games feel bad when you cannot cast or do multiple actions at once. It is like trying to play chess and telling the opponent, you know what, we are going to fight the shit out of each other while moving the pieces. We are going to use some heavy arse pieces of neodymium, so they do not fall apart. Don't sweat it. Yep, it makes no sense. And probably the funniest was looking how some attempt to explain with science why turn-based RPGs are inferior to other genres. Needless to say that you cannot be objective with this. Same thing I said regarding reviews and how to enjoy games once again. Video games cannot be checked in an objective way. It is not like you can say, oh yeah, 1 + 1 = 2, hence these RPGs are bad. But allow me to summarize you all of this with something simpler. Damas y caballeros, en gustos se rompen culos. There goes the monetization. Most of these ideas could be easily summarized as, I don't like turn-based RPGs. And that's pretty much about it. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't like sport games. Last time I played one was like 25 years ago. And you don't see me making a weird video explaining why you should go out there and play the sport rather than the game. Whatever the case, I only check the soft cases because we can go downhill, telling people the net scores that is going to be written down for the ages, but that is not the point. When it comes to taste and opinions, one cannot be objective with these kinds of topics. It is but an opinion. The fact that you don't like or enjoy them, once again, is okay. But this is where things take a twist because many humans develop a sense of belonging towards things. And logic says, oh, I don't like this genre, hence it shouldn't win any award. Probably other games were the best for you. And you can say something like, this is my favorite game. In other words, this one should have won the GOTY. As an isolated comment, sure, it is not that big of a deal. But when many get together against a particular something, is when things start to get interesting. Because this is known as tribalism. It's something like us versus them. Those who like turn-based RPGs versus those who like action games or another genre. And this concept can be extrapolated to many other topics, like politics, sports, trivial stuff like chocolate versus vanilla, etc, etc. But things get fiercer once there is a group that moves under a particular idea. Similar to what happened in Germany somewhere around 1933. An idea is used. The community buys the concept, and there is a good reason to start a crusade. Now, I am no psychologist, but in the company, we were in a team bullying, where we received colors, and that was good enough to start targeting our comrades. Needless to say that it was funny when we were told that it was expected that kind of reaction, and you had me there like, nos han jugado como un condenado macarrón. I was manipulated. So from first hand I can say, you don't need anything but to separate people to begin a conflict. And that is the reason why I didn't want this bit to get into something controversial. It is relatively easy to bring some rage bait and use that as fuel. And it is easy to see several channels that use these kinds of tactics to bring controversy, or how some of them end up developing cult-like behaviors. On one side, it is easy because on internet things work like when there is a group of dogs barking at each other, and the moment a fence is moved aside, things turn relatively peaceful. Okay, the fence is like the internet, because you cannot beat the crap out of each other. In a good number of cases, when there is a debate in person, sure, things get heated, but it is because of effects like tribalism, where we have to be on the winning side. In other words, there is an inhibitory effect on internet, because there is a lack of consequences. And well, unless there are real consequences, people will stop being dodgy on internet. Otherwise, that fence will exist, because we feel comfortable behind a screen. However, if a conflict starts in real life, it is because generally speaking there is already an idea in between, like fighting for your rights, because an opposing team is going to hurt your interest, etc, etc. In any case, and complementing a bit, hate on internet isn't just about tribalism, because we humans aren't as simple as that. We need to add some more spice into the mix, otherwise this doesn't feel well. So at least in these cases, it is important to consider prejudices. The fact that someone enjoys turn-based RPGs gives you a stereotype, similarly as when you say, oh, you play few games, you're a casual, you don't know a franchise from A to C, then you're a tourist, you take video games way too seriously, then you're a tryhard. Well, you can have that idea on mind. Okay, the deal here is that we need an excuse to validate our prejudices toward someone, and if we already believe something, it is easy to keep on believing that a specific something is true. Otherwise your brain is like, oh, wait a second, am I the bad guy here? Am I not allowed to insult someone just because I think this is right? Effectively, this is when a cognitive dissonance hits your brain and kinda crashes like Windows. In other words, some people need validation from other person to reaffirm their hate towards a specific something, and that hits like, aha, I knew it! Those turn-based players are crap. And realistically it is hard to say someone doesn't judge a book by its cover. I do the same. I don't reach the point where I hate someone, but there are things that definitely grind 1 or 2 gears, and I don't say that to justify myself. On this front, it is also true that there is a kind of superiority complex where most try to be above others for really dumb things, like knowing more about an IP, being good in a game pretty much for masochistic ego, economic power, because you work like a modern slave, etc, etc. The deal here is that people have different insecurities, lack of self-esteem, unsolved issues from the past, or other kinds of topics to consider. Now, the main idea here is to bring some consciousness into the table, and yes, these were but simplified explanations, cause you can read whole articles from 2004 where they start to analyze the inhibitory effects from internet, how tribalism is seen, the prepared conflicts in platforms like Twitter, propaganda, agendas, the fact that we are from different countries. Plenty of things can be used as an excuse, but in all honesty, I don't think it is worth fighting many things here on internet. At least I have better things to do than start writing manifestos. But let's not stay on the surface, and let's come back to the turn-based RPGs topic. Some of you may remember that in a bit some months ago, a discussion between easy and hard games began, where a colleague told me he doesn't like turn-based RPGs. Okay, I approached that same person while preparing this vid, like, puto, ¿por qué no te gustan los juegos por turnos? And I wanted to know his reasons, and his answer was kinda unexpected. The reason was because he didn't know many examples, aside from the popular ones like Final Fantasy and Pokémon. So I started to explain more and more about other games, and at least seems like I was able to pique his interest with Shin Megami Tensei: A Strange Journey. Once he heard the background of this story, the general narrative and other details, he was willing to play it. And later he explained me that, most likely, that dislike was just because no one had explained him about other examples. So, next week, I want to talk about some turn-based RPGs I would like to recommend to get into the genre. In any case, for what I have seen in the past and with this coworker, sometimes it is all about not knowing someone in person who can share these kinds of things with you, and we kinda isolate inside a bubble. Unironically, and with similar connotations as when I talked about piracy. At least I think a good number of times people talk negatively about those games because there is a prejudice in between, similarly as when you want to justify your actions or reactions towards a specific something. So if there is already a predisposition, just take a step backwards. Of course, it is worth saying that some people simply try to rage bait. In these cases, it is no surprise you cannot take a step backwards, because someone is pushing your hatred. For example, back when The Last of Us was released, one of my friends was way too pushy about playing it, oftentimes saying that it was way better than many other games I have played. So, of course, when someone with such attitude comes and talks to you, even if he's a friend, that is not the way to get a message across. So yeah, I never played that game because on top of that, there was a dumb bet in between, and he had to step back. In other words, at least if you want to invite your friends or other people into an activity, don't be a moron. It is said that the receiving depends on how you ask. And that is why I don't mind if people have a misconception regarding turn-based RPGs, or at least I don't feel the need to fight back. Oftentimes the points of comparison make no sense, or sometimes it can be simplified as what I said, you don't like them, and that's it. In the end, part of the message is, do not let yourself be manipulated. Every time something is starting to tick your nerves, try to think why it is happening. And if it is something worth getting angry, you will realize that arguing things on internet is pointless and is not worth your time and energy. Same thing goes in real life. But that is just the surface, because if there is a move that wants you to hate on a particular something, this is when you need to stop for a sec and think. Because this is when it counts the most. Oftentimes, there are pieces of humans moving the strings just to separate people, because that way it is easier to control them.